Hola, hola, buenas tardes a todos, espero que estén bien. Vamos a empezar con otra cosa con respecto a la gramática y en este video yo voy a discutir lo que se llama el participio pasado. Es algo que ya hemos visto en clase cuando cubrimos la voz pasiva, pero vamos a entrar en más detalle para esta sección del capítulo y quiero, bueno, como dije, quiero discutirlo en más detalle. Entonces, vamos a hablar del participio pasado, pero como de costumbre, yo les voy a dar estos apuntes en inglés, ¿no es cierto? Porque no les di apuntes fijos en clase, así que ustedes simplemente pueden escribir, pueden apuntar a cualquier cosa que les sea valorosa, ¿no es cierto? Cualquier cosa que les ayude a entender este concepto. Entonces, again, keeping in mind that we'll be taking some free-form notes, so just write down anything that's helpful to you. El participio pasado is the past participle, and like I just mentioned, it is something that we have already seen. And now thinking about it, it's kind of backwards the way I'm teaching it. But we've already seen this with the passive voice. We've seen sentences before, like, for example, the book is written by the author. El libro es escrito por el autor. But that past participle, that escrito part, can show up in a couple different ways that we're going to actually talk about throughout the year, or during the course of the year. And I want to kind of mention them right off the bat so that we're kind of aware of where we'll be going with it. So, if you look on página 14 en una vez más, you'll see at the bottom of the page these ejemplos. So, for example, las noticias están traducidas al inglés. The news is translated into English. But nosotros hemos traducido el artículo. We have translated the article. Or, for example, that third section pair where it says, hay una ventana rota en el aula, but then, ¿quién la ha roto? So, there is a broken window in the room. Who has broken it? And a quick aside, sorry for if it's awkward for me to have this, to have the microphone on, but Liam may make an appearance a little bit. He's just kind of putzing around. And I want to, eliminate as much ambient noise as possible. But if you compare those, you see, for example, the first example, las noticias, up top, traducidas, the past participle, agrees with las noticias. You see, las noticias, it's plural, it's feminine, so traducidas has to agree. Because in that context, it's functioning as an adjective. But later on, you see nosotros, this word hemos, which we'll talk about later, and traducido, and it doesn't agree with anything. It just ends in O, even though it's nosotros is plural. I guess el artículo is one thing, and it's masculine. But traducido doesn't change at all in that context. It just stays in kind of its default form of being masculine and singular. And that's kind of the difference between those two things is really what I want to get into in this video. So, real quick. A quick word about how to form past participles, and this is on página 15 now. Really straightforward with the regular past participles, with the vast majority of them. Remember that with AR verbs, what you'll simply do is you'll take the stem, you'll take the infinitive hablar, drop the AR to find the stem, and then add ado. For example, hablar would be hablado. ER and IR verbs, you'll simply drop the ER, the IR, and then add ido. So comer, for example, would be comido. Vivir, for example, would be vivido. And remember that in the case of the passive voice, we change those endings. So, like, for example, if you were to have the cookies are eaten by Juan, you could say las galletas son comidas por Juan. And that comidas ends up agreeing, being an adjective, it ends up agreeing in gender and in number with galletas, with the cookies that he's eating. This is not always going to be the case. And real quick, let me interrupt myself to just draw your attention to the regular ones. There were a couple that showed up on the quiz. Abrir abierto, cubrir cubierto. We've seen those before. And then there are some more regular ones that I'll talk about in a second. But you really two different ways that you can use the past participle. If you look there for tres, it says para expresar la voz pasiva con el verbo ser. That's what we've already done. We've seen how you can take an active sentence, turn it into a passive sentence, draw attention to the agent, to the to the object, the thing that's being done. And in that case, the past participle has to agree in number and in gender with the thing it's talking about. So for example, there you see el taxi es conducido por un taxista. Conducido agrees with el taxi. Or the second example, los países en vía de desarrollo son ayudados por los países más industrializados. In that case, ayudados there is agreeing with países in gender and number because it's an adjective. But there are other cases where you can just leave hablar, or like for example, hablado or comido or vivido the way it is, and that is going to happen whenever it follows a form of the verb haber. Let me see if I can... I guess I'll just move myself, actually, is the easiest. Yeah. So you see uno there, it says, con el verbo auxiliar haber para formar los tiempos compuestos. In Spanish, as in English, for every simple tense that there is, for example, the present tense, the preterite tense, the imperfect tense, there is also what is called a compound tense, a tiempo compuesto. And this same thing happens in English. In English, you have the present tense. So, for example, I eat cookies. In English, so you also have what is called the present perfect tense. I have eaten cookies. And again, this exists in every tense in English. So, for example, I will eat cookies. I will have eaten cookies. I would eat cookies. I would have eaten cookies. And the same thing happens in Spanish. Basically, for example, you could say, yo como galletas, I eat cookies, or yo he comido galletas, I have eaten cookies. And if we see if we see a tense where it is haber plus a past participle, that past participle is never going to change. It's always going to stay with an O. So for example, you could say, yo he comido galletas, and even though galletas is plural and it's feminine, comido is going to stay the same. Hang on a second. Sorry, Liam wanted to say hi. So, remember that for the test, a lot of people, for the quiz on the passive voice, a lot of people were kind of freaking out when they saw this list, when they saw, completar, completado, completo, all these different past participles that it's just kind of a long list. But I had said, don't worry about that yet. We'll get to that later. And what I wanted to draw attention to is that on the left, if you look, it has the infinitivo. And then in the middle, it says en tiempos compuestos. And then on the right, it says como adjetivo. There are some past participles that have different forms when they're used with haber, when they're used, like, for example, in a compound tense, or when they're used like they are in the passive voice when they're used as an adjective. This same thing happens in English. So, like, for example, you could say, the window is open. Yeah, kid. The window is open, like as an adjective describing the window. Or you could say, I have opened the window. For example, in a compound tense. You would never say, I have opened the window. You would have to throw the ed on the end. I have opened the window. And so it just kind of contains the same idea, but it just is a slightly different form when it's used differently in the sentence. So don't worry too much about these yet. Like, don't feel that you need to memorize them totally, but just be familiar with the fact that in Spanish, just like in English, there are some times where they have different forms that they're used in a compound tense and when they're used as adjectives. So real quick, that was 9 minutes. That was a little bit longer than I had hoped that this would be. But to sum everything that I just set up, past participles you'll find the vast majority of the time just by finding the infinitive, dropping the AR, ER, adding ado for AR verbs, hablado, ido for ER and IR verbs, comido, vivido. And when they're... Thanks. When they're used as an adjective, make sure that they agree with the thing they're talking about. If you see any form of haber before them, though, you're just going to leave them normal. Leave them with the letter O on the end. Now, chicos... Here's another thing maybe to see if we actually watch the video. For tomorrow, what I'd like you to do is to take a second and do that ejercicio de reflexión que aparece en la página 15. I think this is 15. Yeah, 15. Do that activity that appears, that reflexión exercise that we're taking a look at right now. Note the difference between when you see haber and when you see some form of ser. So for example, uno de nuestros vecinos se han, that an or in number 4 or as in number 5, those are forms of haber, so that's when it's going to just leave the letter O. But, for example, dos, where you see ella es una persona muy informal, because we see we see a form of the verb ser, keep in mind that there it's going to have to change, the past participle is going to have to change in number and gender with the thing that it describes. So we're going to practice with this quite a bit over the next week. Remember, we have a test at the end of next week. But just do the ejercicio de reflexión for homework tonight, and we'll go over it tomorrow, and then we'll keep on practicing with the past participle tomorrow. And thank you for putting up with the length of this video as well as with the appearance of Liam. And nos vemos mañana. Espero que tengan una buena noche. Adiós.